Well, hello there. Come closer. I don't bite. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and the history of my family. My name is Charles, and I'm 172 years old. That probably is why I'm walking so slow these days. My father and my mother came from England, my father being named Thomas and my mother Lucy. And when they came to the United States, they settled in a little town. Perhaps you heard of it, Watertown in Jefferson County, somewhere up that way, I believe, in upstate New York. My father was an interesting man. He was a dentist, a preacher, a prohibitionist, an abolitionist. After a bit, my parents moved all 9 of us to Vineland, New Jersey, where my father was made, listen to this, the communion steward in his Methodist church. Being a prohibitionist, he refused to serve wine, and the church finally conceded and let him come up with a symbolic substitute. So in 1859, my father came up with an idea. He and I made a dozen bottles of what we called the juice of the grape. We did it right in our own kitchen, and I was only about 17 years of age. We did this for about 20 years, and the church used this juice to replace the communion wine. We called it the unfermented wine. This grape that my father used was the same that Ephraim Bull had been developing back in the 1850s in Concord, Mass., which of course that's where we get the name for this grape around here, the Concord grape. About the same time, a man named Louis Pasteur, a Frenchman, developed the process of what he called pasteurization, and this helped us make our grape juice last longer so we could bottle it safely. As time went by, my father understood that grape juice could be produced and used year-round, and many churches could use the grape on a regular basis to replace their sacramental wine. Father dreamt that this juice would be a huge success. Well, it didn't take off. He grew very impatient and turned out that he gave the business to me. I was very much interested in trying to develop it further. It took a lot of hard work, and Father provided some necessary capital to help it grow. We were small at first. We only pressed a few tons and had a small group of part-time helpers. I sent out advertisements all over the place, all the churches and organizations in the area, all the while I was studying to be a dentist under my older brother. After working the business for several years, I developed the name for the product. Ready? It was called grape juice instead of unfermented wine in 1892. I left dentistry behind after about 20 years and gave my practice to my sister Emma. Perhaps you met Emma somewhere along the way. She likes to call me Charlie. Well, in 1893, I had an idea to introduce my juice at the Chicago World's Fair. I had a little booth and sold the juice for 5 cents a cup. That got a lot of people's attention, so I went to other conventions and parties and world fairs and country fairs. Over time, I studied the business, but I decided it was time that we do things a little different, do it closer to where the grapes would grow. It was too much shipping here and loading there and unloading and unloading and uploading and on and on and on. And we had to simplify things, be more cost effective, be more efficient. So in July 1897, my father and I came to Western New York for a visit. And after looking at various locations, we determined Westfield was the place. It had everything we were looking for, and Lake Erie was beautiful to behold. There was a gentleman named Elisha J. Had propagated grapes earlier on along the shore, and this was the perfect location to move our business. We chose the corners of North Portage and Nickel Plate Roads, just somewhere over that way, to build our first plant. From there, we expanded, and I guess you'd say the rest is history. You know, I think that building is still here. If you look very carefully, it's a large brick building near a bridge, and it says 1897. Well, any guess what I called the company? No? Well, we called it Welch's Grape Juice Company. Ever hear of it? I'm told it's still pretty popular these days. Those were exciting times back then, and America was on the move. Luckily for the company, the country went into a period of prohibition, no drinking, and grape juice became very popular. Over the years, we got into jams and jellies and other juices, and from what I can tell, the company is still making a variety of other new products. I had a lot of other interests, of course, and I believed in giving back and participating in community service. My business had taken off so well that it allowed me and my family to have a lovely home and estate on the other side of Lake Chautauqua, and we called it Chedwell. Ever heard of it? And we had a nice winter retreat in Florida as well, so we could get away from the harsh winters here. Well, apparently, either I was still very well liked or no one else had wanted the job, but I was elected 6 times as the mayor of Westfield. And then the Prohibition Party talked me into running for Lieutenant Governor of New York State in 1914. I got 44,000 votes and lost. Then in 1916, the same party, the Prohibition Party, ran me for governor of New York State. I got 22,000 votes that time and lost. Well, I gotta go now. So also remember, drink your Welch's juice. It's good for you. Goodbye.
Good evening. It just so happens that I am visiting from Vineland, New Jersey. I thought I would stop and visit my brother Charlie for the weekend, since we don't see each other very often since he moved here to Westfield, the grape capital of the world. Harvest season is my favorite time of year to visit your lovely town. The grapes smell so sweet right now. Charlie, well, you know him as Dr. Charles Welch, has really made a name for himself, making Welch's Corporation a worldwide successful business. I am his younger sister, Dr. Emma Elizabeth Welch. I was born in 1853. Before Charlie moved to Westfield to start his grape juice business, he was a dentist, along with my father, Dr. Thomas Bromwell Welch. Well, I wanted to be a dentist too. But the field of dentistry was still off limits to women because of the premise that women belonged in the home. I even overheard a man say that women could not make a good dentist as they have frail and clumsy fingers. Many women who applied for dental school were told right to their face that they belonged home, cooking and cleaning. Well, there had been much talk in the women's circles about this time, about women demanding the right to vote. So I knew it would only be a matter of time before we were able to do what a man was allowed to do. So, I attended dental college in Ohio and earned my dental degree. My father, my brother Charlie, were very supportive of my decision to become a dentist, and they knew I would make a wonderful practitioner. So Charlie passed along his dental business to me before he left Vineland, New Jersey to come here to Westfield. During the time of me attending college, dentistry was not quite what it is today, but advancements were being made. There was a recent discovery of nitrous oxide, laughing gas, and ether as anesthetics. The dental drill was invented about that time, and cavity treatment and metal fillings such as gold, platinum, silver, and lead were available. During the mid-19th century, people increasingly used soap to clean their teeth. Peppermint, menthol, honey, and sugar were added to counteract the unpleasant flavor of the soap. Those who suffered a toothache often resorted to cocaine to numb their pain. Sugar was becoming more widely distributed during this time in America, so the increase in tooth decay and cavities became more and more prevalent. Bad for you, good for dentists. But they had not made the connection that sugar was causing the tooth decay. Newly married women endured a painfully, yet financially practical wedding gift. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something removed. In order for a husband to escape the costliness of future dental procedures, the wife would have all her teeth extracted and replaced with dentures. Even if a bride had perfectly healthy smile, her teeth would still be removed. Victorian dentures were made of wood, porcelain, animal bone, ivory, rubber, gold and real human teeth. Barbers often doubled as surgeons and dentists, pulling your teeth and cutting your hair. Can you imagine? Oh my. Cavities were considered at this time to be caused by worms in the teeth, and toothaches were treated with preparations made from dried worms and bloody mice. Home remedies were also garlic oil as well as grasshopper eggs in order to preserve the teeth from pain. So, you can see the importance of dentistry is to help diagnose and treat the problems affecting your teeth in a safe and painless manner. While I was attending dental college, I met a wonderful man named Dr. Samuel Slade, who was also a dentist. He eventually moved to Vineland, New Jersey so that we could be closer, and we fell in love and got married. We actually practiced dentistry together and had a successful business working side by side in this new field. We had 2 children, Edna and Arthur also became a dentist. Yes. As much as I love being a dentist, I love being a mother and a wife too. I found time to be the president of the Vineland branch of the Children's Aid Society, as being very active in the Women's Club and the First Methodist Church. At one point later in my life, I became ill, and it lasted for over a year. The doctors never were sure what was wrong with me. So on August 4th, 1928, I passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by my family. I want to thank you all for stopping by, and it was so pleasant speaking with you. I suppose it's time for me to go find my brother Charlie. If you see him, will you tell him I'm looking for him? Have a wonderful evening.
My name is Kent Lewis Brown. I was born on the Ides of March in Westfield in 1916. My father, Lewis Brown, was an accomplished dentist here in Westfield, and my mother was Emma Kent Brown. I was the second born of 4 children. Growing up, I think I may have been a challenge to my parents. It seems like I was always in hot water for pulling what I thought were pretty funny pranks. My folks didn't always agree. One time I killed a big black snake in our yard on Kent and Pleasant Streets. I tied it to a string, hooked it to my belt, and ran through the house yelling that there was a snake after me. I thought my mother was going to have a stroke, and I realized I may have gone a little far. I did well in school for the most part. I was president of my junior and senior class. I always had various jobs around Westfield to make money, and I was involved in many things during my school years. I was a Boy Scout and earned my Eagle Scout badge. I formed an orchestra with many of my musical friends. There were usually 9 of us in the band, and we played at many functions around Westfield. I was very active in the youth group at the Presbyterian Church. Football was my favorite sport. One memorable occasion, at least for those watching the game, was when one of the linemen from Fredonia charged into me and knocked me out. My mother ran from the stands with her umbrella and threatened the poor boy who hit me. It must have been very embarrassing for him. I was very close to my grandpa, Vernon Kent. I think I was his favorite, perhaps because I carried the family name. I would have done anything for him. At one point in elementary school, I became ill with a tuberculosis lesion in my lung. My grandfather convinced my parents that we should go with him to Florida. I remember he smoked his big, old cigars one after another, and I thought I would be asphyxiated in his car on the way there. One special memory about Grandpa Vernon. His wife died young, and he became quite lonely. One night, I went into his house looking for him and discovered him in an upstairs bedroom with a maid in his bed. Sometime shortly after that, we had a talk about things that should be kept private. And I got a brand new erector set. It remained our secret. I was devoted to 2 of the old doctors of Westfield, Van Laughlin and Edgar Rood. I spent a great deal of time talking to them, and they were my motivation for going into medicine. I believed Cornell would be perfect for pre-med school, but my family didn't have enough money to send me. I discovered that there were generous scholarships in animal husbandry and agriculture, so I got in that program and switched over at the end of medicine. After graduation from Cornell and the University of Buffalo Medical School, I was able to get a job training and working at St. Luke's Hospital in Cleveland. While at Cornell, I met Elizabeth Myers, Betty, an education student from Pennsylvania. We married in 1940 and eventually had 4 children. These were the war years, and we were very nervous about where things were going. In July of '42, I joined the Navy and went to Great Lakes Naval Station. I had many medical duties. Sometimes I would examine as many as 2,000 recruits a day. I remember checking for hemorrhoids. The recruits were told to pull down their pants, put their info sheet in their mouth, and bend over while spreading their buttocks. It turned out that I could often see the information sheet between their legs. Sometimes I would say, "I can tell that this man is from Atlanta, Georgia, by the shape of his rectum." I had lots of fun with that. Ultimately, I ended up serving on the heavy cruiser, the San Francisco. I joined the ship in March of '44. We saw many engagements, and our guns were used to soften up the resistance on the islands. As an officer, I had numerous duties, including surgeries. I was in charge of testing all foods that came on the ship. When the senior medical officer got sick and left the ship, I took over as acting senior medical officer. That put me in charge of more than 1,200 men. Thank God for the medical corpsmen on board. They were a wonderful help. After the war, I returned to St. Luke's Hospital in Cleveland, but had to begin anew, at the bottom of the totem pole. After 2 years of doing all sorts of surgeries on a rolling ship, I was assigned to radiology for 6 months. Finally, I was able to do surgery and began to study with many accomplished surgeons. Several of us got together with some old war buddies and started the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma. I was a charter member. The goal was to put wartime procedures we had learned with mass casualties into place. Over time, my practice grew. I was active in organizations like Kiwanis and served as a deacon in the Fairmount Presbyterian Church. I had an interest in magic and at one time was considered the second best magician in Cleveland. I was involved in a number of medical groups and was teaching at both the Cleveland Clinic and Case Western University. I worked on editing a book on the history of medicine in Cuyahoga County and Cleveland. It's still required reading for medical students at Case. Writing was one of my passions, and I published 5 books. A favorite, 6 Against Death, includes the war stories of men from Westfield. Westfield still had my heart. I would often work all week in Cleveland and come to Westfield on the weekends and do surgeries at Westfield Memorial Hospital, where I was on staff. In 1982, when I retired, we moved to Westfield to live in the home that had been built by my great-uncle, Elmore Kent. Betty and I both became very involved in the community, serving the hospital, the library, and the YWCA. Westfield is a fantastic place, and it gave me all the upbringing I needed to become successful. I was always so proud to be from a small town that had so many wonderful people and experiences. Thank you.
Hello, I am Mabel Henrietta Peterson Herbst. Some of you may know my granddaughter, Christy Herbst. She's quite the Chautauqua County historian, and she wanted so much for me to be here tonight that she's put together a script so that I can tell you my story. In 1890, I was born in an area in far northern Minnesota, a beautiful part of the world. It was a great place to grow up. I had brothers and sisters to play with, a pony to ride to school, and the neighborhood kids were so much fun. As I approached the years when grown children begin to move on in life, I had one major goal: to make my own way in the world so as not to burden my parents. You see, I was the eldest of 6 children, so my parents had lots of mouths to feed. Of course, as a girl, I was expected to be married off so I'd have a husband to support me. But I sure wasn't ready for that. There was a whole world out there, and I wanted to see it. So, to be able to support myself, I took the only job I could find, becoming an assistant cook for a crew of itinerant farm workers who followed the wheat harvest. Starting in the Texas Panhandle in the spring, we'd then move north through the prairies, following the ripening crop, and finishing up in Minnesota in the fall. That was in 1908, and I was only 17. What an adventure! We traveled in horse-drawn wagons and camped on the outskirts of small towns. Our crews were hired by local farmers to help gather their grains with our fancy mule-drawn combine harvester. I loved that life. Seeing new places, meeting new people, and learning to cook for large groups, a skill I would use whenever I needed money throughout my life. Now, you parents out there, don't worry, I was safe. The cook was a kind older gentleman who promised my father he would take care of me, and he did. But best of all, during that time, I met the man I would marry when we were harvesting the wheat on his family's farm in southern Minnesota. Oh, I was smitten. Paul Frank Herbst was dark and handsome, and because he was a decade older than I, he seemed so worldly. Married within a year, Paul and I settled in a house he built on the farm. Along came two sons, Earl and Boyd, then our beloved daughter, named for my favorite sister, Lilas. I was happy living there on the farm with all of the others, until I wasn't. Being the youngest of the wives of four brothers wore pretty thin, I thought I would be trapped for the rest of my life. Paul knew what I was feeling. Looking back, I realize he too must have been chafing under the yoke of running a farm in partnership with his brothers. But he was in charge of the farm's horses, the working stock, as well as the side business of breeding and selling horses. So one year, he traveled to make a delivery to a farmer in Westfield, New York. He returned home raving about the appeal of this area, the beauty, the opportunities to farm or find other work. And so he packed up our family and we headed east. Thank God. By 1920, we were living on Hardenberg Road, where Paul farmed a small vineyard. Eventually, we settled in town, making our home over there at 60 Spring Street. We were so happy our first years here, which then were marred by the tragedy of our precious Lilas. Having contracted meningitis, this cheerful, affectionate child, this excellent student, died at the unthinkable age of 9. I can't describe our loss. You never get over losing a child. The first of us to be buried, you can find her round headstone over there close to the shed. Paul and I had one more child, Darwin. Eventually, the older boys married, starting their own families. We weathered the Great Depression. Then in 1942, Darwin graduated from high school and immediately went off to war. Happily, on his return from that conflict, he began his family. However, our calm soon was shattered when my Paul died. I was a widow at 57. Left on my own, I sold the house on Spring Street, instead renting a small apartment. Tying grapes in the spring and picking them in the fall, I further supplemented my income by cooking in local restaurants. As the years passed and I realized I was aging, I wanted to take action to be sure I didn't become a burden to my boys. As there was still so much out there I wanted to see. I knew I could not travel the world, but I could travel our country. So I bought a Rand McNally Road Atlas and began planning my itinerary. The Greyhound bus agent and I worked out a 12-foot-long string of open-ended tickets, which eventually would take me to my destination, San Pedro, California. It was difficult leaving my boys and their families. I didn't expect to see them or my grandchildren again. I spent several years on the road, and what a trip I had. Oh, along the way, I spent quite a bit of time in Minnesota visiting my son Boyd and the scattered families of my sisters and brothers. Whenever I ran short of money, I'd take a job someplace as a short order cook. And so it went for the rest of the trip and for the rest of my life. I did stay close to my children and grandchildren through cards and letters, especially enjoying corresponding with my grandchildren. One time, my brother Kenneth and I collected pockets full of rocks from a California beach. I boxed them up and sent them to Darwin's girls, Diane, Christy, and Joan, who were living in Hartfield, New York. I just knew how excited those sisters would be receiving that touch of the Pacific Ocean. And they were. Wish I'd been able to know them as adults. So I lived out the rest of my life there in California. I did see Earl and Darwin one more time when they drove out west. Oh, what a wonderful few days we enjoyed together. Reminded of how much my family loved me, and happily satisfied by my son's visit. I died soon after, in the fall of 1964, at the age of 74. Oh, now that's enough about me. It's time for you to move on. By the way, I want to finish my highball and smoke my cools, so shoo, shoo.
Well, my story starts in the years after World War I. The sleepy, bucolic world of rural America was beginning to change, and a man named Henry Ford was to blame. When he invented the first Model T automobile, he put America on wheels, and as more roads were being built and cars were improved, people who had never traveled farther than the outskirts of their own towns started traveling by the thousands. Roads couldn't be built fast enough, and suddenly family motor trips were all the rage. Americans were a pioneer stock, naturally adventurous, and soon began driving all over the country. Hello, my name is Willis Ralph Wilson. I grew up and graduated from Westfield Academy here in Westfield and attended Bryant and Stratton Business College in Buffalo, earning a business degree. Born in 1902. Growing up in this time, the real horsepower was king, and I saw the direction beginning to change. Big time. Motor transportation was moving in on the horse. However, stations where you could fill up your car with gasoline or buy spare parts or fix any car problems were few and far between. And at this time, in many rural communities, gasoline was being sold in open 2-gallon containers in small family-owned grocery stores, like a Joe Ricketts red and white store here in Westfield on Main Street. Joe could go in the backroom store, fill up a 2-gallon container and carry it through the store to the front counter to his customers. Well, in 1920, there were 15,000 gas stations in the entire country. By 1933, the number had jumped to 170,000, but there was still a need for more. In the late 20s, I traveled to Dearborn, Michigan to work for the Ford Motor Company, working in the paint booth, putting the shiny black finishes on the cars. I fell in love with working with cars. And I also fell in love when married a pretty young Westfield teacher named Jessie M. Campbell in 1929. A lot of opportunity comes when economic conditions are poor. To find the need and pursue the dream of fulfilling that need can open doors to economic and personal success while helping others. It was clear to me that the automobile was the future, and what better business to get into than owning a gas station. I had the vision that nothing, not even depression, would stop the growth of the automobile and the need for gas stations everywhere. So I made the decision to start my own gas station business back here in Westfield. Early on, I realized that the people of this depression couldn't buy brand new parts for their vehicle repair. So I purchased a wrecker to go out and pick up used cars from auto accidents, bringing them back to the station, stripping them of all their good parts, and selling them at a greatly reduced price. It was at this point that the size of our business doubled. This sign out front now read, Wilson Benson, New and Used Auto Parts. Bill Benson was a neighbor, friend of mine, who helped me get the business started and was a good fit for a partner. By this time, my family grew to 3 children, Nancy Jane, Ralph Willis, and Richard George Wilson. We lived in a brown shingled 2-story house at 20 Union Street. We moved up to the homestead at 20 Bliss Street in 1945. After my mother, Elfie Rose Wilson, had come up to this blissful place with the Father of Heaven. My children were now getting to the age that they wanted to help in the business. So at 8 and 10 years old, they were changing tires, building clutches, pumping gas, changing oil, and of course, giving customers fine service when they pulled up and to get some fuel for their car. Wash the windows, check the oil, battery, radiator fluid, checking and filling the tires, sweeping out floorboards with a whisk broom. And of course, trying to sell a quart of oil. For some of those tasks, Dick and Ralph had to use a shop stepladder. In 1943, the price of a gallon of gas was 17.9 cents, and a quart of oil was 30 cents. And I was also a village mayor for 4 terms, served in the fire department, and was part of the 1st EMT division of the department, and other county and state organizations. Well, I became ill and had to withdraw from work and other activities. It was hard to leave the people and things I loved to serve and be part of. And finally, in 1963, I passed away and joined my other family and friends with my Father and Savior in heaven. So that's my story. I love having this chance to be with you tonight, and have a very pleasant evening. And sir, you look a lot like my son, Ralph Willis Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah. We have a resemblance.
What is your name?
David Wilson.
Oh, you're my grandson.
That's right. We never met.
Well, now we have.
Yeah. I was about 1 when you...
1.
Yep.
Very nice to meet you, godson.
You too. Thank you.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Edward Albert Skinner. I was born May 10th, 1841 in Aurora, New York. My father, Reverend Levi Skinner, was a First Presbyterian minister, and after several years of preaching to his beloved congregation, he lost his voice from speaking too loudly from the pulpit. So unfortunately, he was compelled to retire earlier than expected. After much thought, he decided to move our family to Westfield, New York in 1854, when I was just 12 years old. After 10 years of hard work, he became a stockholder and director of the First National Bank of Westfield. He was eventually elected president of the First National Bank of Westfield until his death. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm telling you so much about my father's career. My father was a successful banker, which influenced me as I became an adult. When we moved to Westfield, I attended Westfield Academy and completed my education there. When I was 16 years of age, I became a bookkeeper at the Bank of Westfield. I was employed there for 2 years until I found a new opportunity in mercantile business until 1861, when I enlisted in the Civil War with Company G, 9th New York Cavalry. I had served as second lieutenant for several months. I was promoted to first lieutenant, and shortly afterwards was commissioned regimental quartermaster, which was the position I held for the next 2.5 years. I was acting as brigade quartermaster much of the time. At the end of the Civil War, I was discharged due to an injury and was sent back here to Westfield. I was hired at the First National Bank of Westfield as assistant cashier. I enjoyed that job very much. I was employed in that position until 1870. At that time, I was asked to travel to Ottawa, Kansas to help organize the First National Bank of Ottawa, which still bears my name to this day. I returned from Ottawa after my job had completed and was elected vice president of the National Bank of Westfield and held that job for 11 years. When my father passed away, I was then elected to take his position as the president of the First National Bank of Westfield. A well-established and well-conducted bank is a marked feature of progress in any community, and I am proud to say the First National Bank of Westfield has been so conducted that it has always commanded public confidence. Later in my years, I was involved in politics and was town supervisor of Westfield for several years. I also served as the treasurer of the Supreme Council of the Royal Arcanum. The Royal Arcanum offered insurance and annuities that protected your family while making an impact in the community. Our profits went back into your neighborhood through college scholarships and charitable activities, not into stock price. Now you must be thinking, is that all that man does, his work? It was not all business and no pleasure. In 1864, I married my first wife, Frances M. Barger. We were partners for not quite 10 years until her death in 1872. A couple of years later, I married Augusta Wheeler, who was the daughter of the Honorable William F. Wheeler and the president of the First National Bank of Olean, New York. I had 3 beautiful children, Flora, Egbert, and Frances. After a brief illness, I passed away in 1912 at the age of 71. I had a very joyful and successful life. I am so grateful that I was able to share my story with you. It has been lovely visiting with you all this evening. Thank you.